The fries and the growl. The space station floated in silence above a gas giant, full of steel halls, flickering lights, and tired faces. Among those faces was a human named Jason. He worked as a mechanic fixing broken panels, busted lights, and anything else that came his way. He didn't talk much. No one really talked to him either. Just another guy in a jumpsuit trying to earn credits and survive. That day had been long. His hands were still stained with grease. He walked into the food court at the edge of the docking bay and ordered the same thing he always did: crispy fries and a fizzy drink. Cheap, salty, warm, comfort food in a cold galaxy. He sat at a corner table, away from the others. As he picked up his first fry, he noticed her. She was sitting on the floor near the trash bin, thin, pale skin with a strange shimmer, big dark eyes, wide open, not blinking. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were torn, definitely not a crew uniform. She looked young, maybe 16 or 17 in human years, but with aliens, it was hard to tell. Jason stared for a second. She was staring at the fries. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes followed every bite he took like a predator watching prey. She wasn't begging, she wasn't even asking, just watching. Hungry, he looked around. No one else noticed her, or maybe they just ignored her, like he almost did. Then, with a sigh, Jason pushed the tray a little closer to the edge of the table and said quietly, "You want some?" She didn't move. He lifted one fry, waved it slightly in her direction. Her body tensed. She crawled forward slowly, like a wild animal, but her eyes never left his. Then, quick as a flash, she grabbed the fry and backed away. She sat on her knees and ate it slow, deliberate, like it was the first real food in days. Jason blinked. He pushed the tray further. "Go ahead, take more." This time she moved faster, still cautious but desperate. She didn't grab everything, just a few fries, then backed off again. She didn't say a word, just kept eating with tiny bites. Jason watched in silence. The food court buzzed around them, but it felt like they were in a bubble, just the two of them. When the tray was almost empty, Jason stood up. "That's all I got." The girl didn't reply. She just nodded once, like she understood. He tossed the tray and cup in the bin and left. The door slid shut behind him. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. That night, Jason returned to his cabin in Sector C. He walked down the quiet hallway, boots echoing, and turned toward his door, and stopped. She was there, the same girl, sitting cross-legged right in front of his door. "What the hell?" he whispered. She looked up slowly. Her eyes locked on his. No fear, no shame, like she was waiting. "Are you following me?" Jason asked. Unsure if she could understand, no reply. He walked forward, trying to keep calm. "Listen, I'm not a babysitter. You got what you wanted. Go home, wherever that is." She didn't move. Jason stepped closer. "I need to go inside." She stood and silent, steady, thin shoulders squared, still not saying anything. Jason sighed. He tapped his door panel, and the metal slid open with a hiss. He glanced at her once more. "Look, just don't be weird, okay?" He entered. A few minutes later, as he drank water and checked the station messages, he heard a low sound outside, like a deep growl. Jason froze. He got up and opened the door. She was still there, and she was growling, but not at him. Two station workers were walking by, chatting and laughing. As they neared Jason's door, the girl took a step forward and let out a sharp, threatening growl, deep and animalistic. The workers stopped, stared, and quickly turned the other way. Jason stood there, shocked. "Did you just growl at them?" She turned back and looked at him with calm eyes, then sat down again, guarding his door. Jason rubbed his face. "This is insane." He tried calling security. No answer. The station was always slow after shift hours. He tried ignoring her. That didn't work either. In the morning, she was still there, sitting silently, eyes open, like a watchful wolf. A few people walked by. She didn't move unless someone came close. Then the low growl would start again, like a warning. They all walked faster. Jason didn't know her name, didn't know her species, didn't know why she was here. But one thing was clear. He gave her fries. Now, she wasn't leaving, and she wasn't letting anyone else near him either. she chooses him. Jason could not believe what was happening. He had never seen anyone scare off a security droid before. Those machines were built to handle drunks, thieves, even small riots. But this thin, silent girl had growled, and it had turned around and rolled away. He stepped outside his cabin, rubbing the back of his neck. "You need to stop this," he said gently. "I don't know what you think I did, but you can't just stay here. You're going to get me in trouble." The girl stood up slowly. She didn't speak. Her eyes watched his every move, not angry, just focused, like she was waiting for a command that never came. Jason walked down the corridor, hoping she would stay behind. She followed him step for step, always 3 paces behind, always silent. Every time someone got near, her shoulders tensed, her eyes narrowed, her hands curled like claws, ready to strike. The day passed with whispers. People stared. Some avoided him completely. Others just gave a look full of confusion and a little fear. By the time Jason got off his shift, he had enough. He marched to the station's administration office. The old desk clerk barely looked up from her screen. "I need help? There's a girl following me. She won't leave me alone. She's growling at everyone's species." The clerk asked in a bored voice. "I don't know," he said. "Small alien girl, pale skin, dark eyes, shimmery hair, doesn't speak, but she won't stop following me." The woman blinked, then typed a few commands. One moment she called in someone from Xena. A tall man with orange gloves and an even taller scanner entered the room. He looked tired but curious. "Where's the girl?" he asked. "Bring her in." Jason turned around. She was already standing at the door, quiet, still watching. The xenobiologist's eyes widened. "Oh, stars, is she bonded already?" "What do you mean bonded?" Jason asked. "Did you give her food when she was alone and vulnerable?" The man asked. "Yeah, I gave her fries. She looked hungry." The man dropped his datapod. "You shared food with her during her time of isolation. That's not just kindness in her species. That's the bonding ritual of the Lysari. It's sacred now. She sees you as her chosen one." Jason's jaw dropped. "You're telling me she's attached to me because of a few Not about the food, it's about the act. Her people were engineered for loyalty after the Great Scattering. One gift during their weakness and they imprint forever. She has chosen you as her protector, and in return, she will defend you to the death." Stared at the girl. She blinked slowly. No emotion, but something in her stillness spoke louder than words. The xenobiologist continued. "You're lucky. Most Lysari bonds are triggered in battles or disasters. Yours happened in a food court. That's not lucky," Jason said. "I fix pipes. I'm not ready to be someone's life partner, bodyguard, whatever. This is you. Don't have a choice now. Neither does she. Breaking the bond will harm her mind and possibly kill her." Jason ran a hand through his hair. "Great. So now I'm stuck with a quiet alien shadow who growls at everyone and sees me as her chosen one." The scientist gave a small nod. "That's about right." Jason turned to the girl. "What do I even call you? Do you have a name?" She opened her mouth for the first time. Her voice was low, soft, broken. "Era. My name is Era." Jason blinked. "Okay, Era. Fine, but no more growling. You can't keep scaring people." Era tilted her head. She looked confused, like she didn't understand the problem. The xenobiologist stepped in again. "She's not doing it to scare. She's doing it because she thinks you're in danger. That's how they protect growling." Posturing warning. Jason looked at Ara again. She stood like a statue, but her eyes never stopped moving, always scanning, always watching for threats. He sighed. "All right. If I can't send you away, then you'll have to come with me, but no attacks, no growling, unless someone's actually dangerous." Delara nodded once. A quiet promise in that small motion. They left the office together, but as they walked back toward the mechanic sector, a strange beeping sound echoed through the hala. Security drones stopped beside them. Scanning, target identified." Jason froze. The scanner wasn't aimed at him, it was locked on Era. New voice came from the drone. "Bounty match confirmed. High priority asset subject is wanted by the Khazari syndicate. Do not resist." Era stepped in front of Jason without hesitation. Her shoulders rose, her muscles tightened, her growl returned, but this time it was deeper willed. Jason looked from her to the drone, then to the glowing bounty marker on her image. "What have you gotten me into?" Arashi didn't answer. She just growled louder as the drone raised its weapon. Target on both backs. Era moved faster than any human eye could follow, and before the drone could fire, she slammed into it with full force, knocking it against the wall with a loud crunching sound, and metal sparks flew everywhere. as the drone let out a broken screech trying to reboot its systems, but Era didn't stop. Her hands clawed through its panels, tearing out wires and processors until the drone dropped to the ground, smoking and dead, and Jason just stood there frozen, unable to believe what he had seen. She turned to him, chest rising and falling, her eyes glowing with a strange light and her hands stained with oil and smoke, and Jason could tell that the growl was still in her throat, ready to come out again if anything else moved toward them. But for now she was still like a wolf that had just finished hunting and was waiting for the next threat. Jason swallowed hard and whispered, "What was that? What is the Khazari Syndicate, and why do they want you?" And Ara did not speak. Right away her eyes searched his face as if she was trying to measure how much truth she could give him and how much he could carry, and finally she spoke with a quiet voice, "They owned me once," and Jason felt something sharp twist in his chest, because the way she said it was not angry or scared, it was just a fact, like someone saying they used to live in another city or wear a different uniform. He stepped back into his cabin and she followed him, closing the door behind her, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything. The silence was heavy but not empty, it was full of the things they weren't ready to say yet. And then finally, Jason sat on his small bunk and looked at her straight in the eyes and said, "If I'm going to help you, I need to know everything you have to tell me, what this bond really means, and who's chasing you and why they marked you as dangerous." Sarah nodded once and sat on the floor, knees pulled up to her chest, and her voice was still soft but it carried weight. Her words came slowly but clearly. "When a Lysari is starved, alone and shown mercy by another, it creates a life connection, and I cannot break it without pain worse than death. And I didn't choose it with thought, it chose me, because you gave kindness without asking for anything back." And Jason listened without interrupting, because for the first time he saw more than a strange alien girl guarding him. He saw someone who had been hunted and broken and still stood like a shield between him and danger. She continued, "The Khazari took my people, sold them to labs, black markets, mining colonies, anything they could use, and I was one of the few who escaped, but they put a tag inside me, something that called to them, and now they know I'm here, and they will keep sending hunters until I'm taken back or until I'm dead. And now you're in the middle because you gave me fries, because you saw me." Jason rubbed his face with both hands and leaned forward. "This is insane. I'm just a mechanic. I fix pipes and seal leaks. I'm not some hero. I don't even own a weapon, and now I'm on the Khazari hit list just because I couldn't eat my lunch in peace." And Ara looked at him without blinking and said, "I will protect you. That is my purpose now." And Jason shook his head. "This is not protection. This is a death sentence." He stood and paced the room for a moment, thinking fast. Then he opened a panel in the wall, revealing an old tool locker, and pulled out a small shock baton and a hidden beacon he never thought he'd need again, and looked back at her. "We need to get off this station now. If they marked you, they'll send more drones, maybe bounty hunters, maybe worse. We have to disappear." And Ara stood as well, ready to move, as if his words had unlocked the command she had been waiting for. They slipped through the back corridors of the station, avoiding cameras and guards. Jason knew every maintenance tunnel, every loose grate and unused passage, and Ara moved silently behind him, always alert, always scanning, and he could feel the tension in the air rising with every step, like the station itself was breathing heavier, waiting for the next explosion. When they reached the docking bays, Jason paused and pointed at an old cargo ship, rusted at the edges with one engine blinking red, and said, "I fixed that one last week. It still runs not well, but enough to get us to a border system, if we're lucky." And Era said, "Luck is better than waiting for chains." And they climbed aboard just as a group of armed figures entered the far side of the bay, moving fast, scanning every ship. Jason jumped into the pilot seat, powered the engine, and the ship groaned like a tired beast waking from sleep. And then lights flashed behind them. A warning alarm blared. "Unauthorized launch detected," but it was too late. Jason punched the throttle, and the ship blasted forward, scraping the walls of the bay as it barely cleared the exit tunnel. They were out, but only just behind them. The crackled with a voice from station control. "You are leaving without clearance. Return now, or be fired upon." And Jason turned the off and kept flying, and Ara sat beside him, watching the stars as they stretched into lines, and the engine hummed louder. And for the first time since they met, she looked calm. Jason knew things were only going to get harder. Now they had escaped the station, but not the bounty, not the danger, not the past, and now both their names were targets. He turned to her and said, "You said I gave you something when I shared my fries, but you gave me something too, and I don't know what it is yet, but I think I'm starting to understand." Era looked at him with a small nod and said, "I see you and you saw me, and in my language that means more than words can say." Or burned. The stars stretched across the black like silver veins, glowing through the skin of the galaxy, and the small cargo ship shivered each time. The old engine skipped a beat, but Jason kept his hands on the controls, eyes locked on the scanner, as if staring hard enough would keep them invisible from the hunters that followed, and Ara sat beside him, not blinking, her posture alert yet still. Her silence filled the space with a strange calm that Jason found comforting and terrifying at the same time, because now he understood that the girl beside him would tear through fire if it meant keeping him alive. The escape had been sudden and messy, and now they were floating between uncharted lanes trying to avoid patrols and bounty relays, but it was only a matter of time before someone found them again, and Jason knew they had to make a decision soon, because their fuel was low, their food even lower, and worst of all, the ship had no jump drive, which meant they were flying blind with nowhere to hide for long, and the shadow of the Khazari syndicate would catch up soon. He looked over at Ara, who had not moved since takeoff, and said, "We need to talk about what comes next," and she turned her eyes to him without emotion and said, "We survive," and Jason shook his head. "That's not a plan, that's a hope, and I'm tired of hoping. I want to know if you have any idea where we can go, where they won't find us, or at least where we can disappear." And Ara thought for a long moment before speaking. "There is a System 3 jumps from here, where my people once lived. The planet is dead, but the orbiting stations are abandoned. No law, no control, no syndicates, only scavengers and ghosts." And Jason gave a dry laugh. "Sounds perfect." They set course and drifted quietly into the dark, and the silence between them was not cold but heavy, like the weight of things neither had said but both carried deep inside. And Jason thought about Earth, not the place itself, but the idea of it, the smell of clean rain, the sound of boots on wooden steps, the warmth of being around people who remembered your name, not just your function. And Ara watched him like she could read those memories through his skin, but said nothing. The second day in deep space brought a problem. They had not expected the tracker was still active somewhere inside Era's body, and it pulsed every few hours, sending a soft ping into the black that Jason finally noticed through the backup systems. And when he told her, she closed her eyes and said, "I knew, but I hoped it died when the drone was destroyed." And Jason clenched his jaw, because he realized they were being hunted, not just from what she had done, but from what she still carried. "I to cut it out," he said, and she nodded. "I cannot do it myself. It is deep and old, and I do not know where it is exactly." And Jason stared at the medkit, then at her, then back at the tools in his shaking hands, because he was no surgeon, just a mechanic, with experience patching metal, not flesh. But Era lay on the table without fear, just trust, and that scared him more than the tracker ever could. He powered the scanner and traced the signal to a thin object embedded near her lower spine, and without saying anything more, he numbed the area with a freezing patch and began to cut, using tools too blunt and hands too rough. And she gritted her teeth but made no sound, and when he reached the device, a thin metal chip, barely bigger than a fingernail, he pulled it free, and the second it left her body, the ship alarms stopped blinking, and the signal on the scanner vanished. She passed out from the shock, and Jason wrapped the wound the best he could, using everything in the kit. And when she finally opened her eyes again, hours later, he was still sitting beside her, watching for signs of fever or infection. And when their eyes met, she whispered "thank you" in a voice so raw it made him feel like the space between them had melted into something stronger than friendship and heavier than duty. They landed on the edge of the dead system Era had spoken of the next day, and Jason piloted the ship toward a broken ring station, half floating, half shattered, the lights gone and silence filling every corridor, and it felt like the station was holding its breath as they docked and stepped into its hollow bones. And there was no one to greet them, no alarms, no voices, only echoes of a place forgotten by time. They found a power core still working, and Jason set up a small charge cycle for the ship, while Ara explored the halls, always ahead, always quiet. And in one of the lower chambers they found food packs, sealed and long expired but still safe enough, and Jason sat with her beside a broken window looking out at the planet below, a lifeless rock surrounded by the debris of a lost civilization. And he said, I used to think I was just a man fixing broken things, and now, I feel like I'm one of the broken things. And Ara reached out slowly, resting her hand on his arm and said, broken things can still protect, they can still love. And Jason did not pull away. The peace did not last long because, as they slept, a soft flicker came through the coma-coded message, bouncing off the old station's relay, and Jason woke to see the words flashing again and again, in red Khazari asset, located, prepare for extraction. And he ran to the window and saw them, 3 ships, black and fast, approaching from the shadows with one purpose written in their path: bring her back or burn everything in their way. Pain and loyalty. The sound of engines grew louder as the black ships closed in their dark holes, cutting through the empty stars like blades, and Jason stood at the edge of the ruined docking bay, watching them approach with eyes that had seen enough to understand what was coming, because these were not patrols or warning vessels. These were hunters built for capture and destruction, with no interest in mercy and no concern for life. And Era stood beside him, silent as always, her fingers twitching like they were remembering every scar she had earned on her way to this moment. They didn't speak as they prepared the station for what little defense it could offer. Jason ran through the broken control room, checking for power surge lines, vent controls, anything that could be turned into a trap, while Ara walked the halls, barefoot and calm, memorizing the paths, the shadows, the weaknesses of the steel and glass around them. And though her body was still healing from the tracker removal, there was no sign of hesitation, only a focus that made Jason believe in something he couldn't name it. Hour later, they sat in the control chamber, surrounded by blinking wires and low hums, and Jason handed her a small power cell wrapped in a cable he had modified into a charge bomb, and said, this might only buy us a few minutes, but sometimes that's all it takes. And Ara nodded and took the device with both hands, as if he had given her something sacred, not just scraps from an old machine. And that quiet moment between them held more weight than 1,000 words. Jason broke the silence with a question he had held for too long. Why didn't you leave me when you had the chance? Back on the station you could have escaped alone. And she looked at him without blinking and said, you shared your food and you did not ask who I was, and when they came you stood beside me. That is what my people call a soul bond, and I will never run from you. I will only run with you. And Jason felt something twist deep in his chest. Not fear, not even love yet, but something older, something made from truth and pain and choice. The ships landed without a sound, black wings folding as soldiers in silver armor poured out like smoke through the corridors, and Ara moved like wind, silent and fierce, leading them into traps. One by one through vents and halls, Jason triggered door locks and blew pressure lines, flooding the paths with gas and flame, slowing the soldiers but never stopping them, because the Khazari did not send amateurs. They sent men and machines built for one thing only: reclaiming what they believed. They owned it. Was in the lower corridor that it happened. Jason turned a corner too fast and caught a stun bolt in the shoulder. His vision went white as he slammed into the wall and fell gasping and unable to move his arm, and the world tilted and narrowed, and for a second he thought it was over, until Ara's scream ripped through the corridor like thunder, and she came flying from the shadows, tearing into the soldier who had shot him, claws flashing with fury, teeth bared. Not growling now, but roaring, a sound so primal it shook the metal around them. Jason watched her fight with everything she had, her body a blur of motion, her wounds reopening as she threw herself into the attack. And when it was over, the soldier lay broken and still, and she dropped beside Jason, breath, ragged blood dripping from her side. And he reached for her with his good hand and whispered, you came back. And she answered with a voice full of pain but steady, I always will. They moved together through the station, more slowly now, blood on both their clothes, smoke in the air, alarms, screaming in dying rhythms, and Jason knew they couldn't hold this place any longer. It was not a fortress, it was a grave waiting to be filled. And he looked at Ara and said, we need to end this one way or another. And she nodded, then led him to the station core, where the ancient engines still pulsed beneath layers of cracked steel. Jason set the bomb in the reactor housing, fingers trembling as he wired the charge to the old fusion chamber, and Era stood watch, eyes never blinking, breath short from the pain. And when it was done, Jason looked at her and said, we blow the core, we take their ships with it. And then we run for the freighter and we pray. And Ara reached out and took his hand in hers and said, I trust your hands more than the stars. And Jason closed his fingers around hers, and for the first time since it all began, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. They ran through fire and shadow alarms blaring and metal creaking, and behind them the station's heart began to burn brighter than it had in 100 years as the core charged and screamed. And when they reached the freighter, Jason slammed the hatch closed and fired the engine with a roar that echoed across the silent ring. And as they pulled away, the explosion behind them lit up the void like a second sun, and the black ships crumbled in the fire as the station broke apart into glowing dust. Dara collapsed in the co-pilot seat, her body shaking from blood loss and exhaustion, and Jason turned toward her, tears stinging his eyes as he said, Stay with me, just stay. And she looked at him with the softest smile he had ever seen and said, I will not leave you. You are the only home. I have one last stand. The freighter limped through the void, its hull scorched from heat and debris, its engine coughing with every burst of thrust, but Jason kept it moving, eyes fixed on the navigation screen where a single habitable planet blinked with low atmosphere, no major settlements, and no syndicate signal. A place forgotten by most, but maybe just quiet enough to hide. And as he flew, Ara lay behind him on the narrow medical bed, pale and breathing shallow, her wounds wrapped with all the care he could offer, but her strength fading faster than he could fight. He spoke to her even when she slept, telling stories about Earth, about the color of oceans, about the sound of wind through trees, about how he once fixed an old car that ran on wheels, and how the owner gave him a fresh apple as thanks, and how that was the first real smile he remembered since his father died. And though she never answered, her fingers would twitch when he spoke, and he took that as enough to keep going. As they approached the atmosphere, the ship groaned and shook, and he angled it downward toward the green shadow of a valley surrounded by cliffs and mist. And when they landed, the ship came to a halt with a hiss of steam and the sound of metal surrendering to gravity. And Jason wasted no time. He carried Ara, his arms through thick trees and muddy soil, until he found shelter in the form of an old mining cabin covered in moss, but sturdy enough to keep out rain and wind and maybe unwanted eyes. He placed her on the only intact bed and sat beside her, watching every breath, and when she opened her eyes for the first time in hours, he gave her water and said, We made it, and she touched his arm with weak fingers and whispered, We are not alone. And before he could speak again, there was a sharp chirp from the scanner on his belt, a signal bouncing off the valley walls, and blinking red. One ship, approaching fast, not syndicate marked but armed, and Jason knew it could be a pirate or worse. He stood and reached for the only weapon they had left, a plasma torch modified for short bursts, and he looked at Ara, who tried to rise but failed, and he said, You are not moving, not this time. You saved me more times than I can count now. It's my turn. And she gave him a look filled with fear, not for herself but for him, and he forced a smile that did not reach his eyes and whispered, I'll come back or I won't, and either way you rest. Now the ship landed on the far ridge, and Jason climbed the hills slow and careful until he could see it, a sleek Mado, not Kazari, but not friendly either, and from the hatch stepped a single figure in dark armor, helmet smooth with no insignia, and the person raised a hand and called out with a voice filtered but calm, I'm not here to fight. I tracked the signal from the explosion, and I know what you destroyed. I just want to talk. Jason kept his weapon low but ready and asked, Who are you? And the stranger removed the helmet, revealing a woman with deep scars across her jaw and eyes that had seen too many battles, and she said, My name is Lena. I used to work for the syndicate. I used to hunt people like her, until one day I stopped, and they tried to hunt me, and now I help those who run, and sometimes those who fight. He did not trust her, not yet. But there was something in her eyes, something tired and angry, not at him but at the same people who chased Ara. And when he brought her down to the cabin, and she saw Ara lying weak but alive, Lena did not raise her weapon. She knelt beside her and said, I've seen what they did to your kind. I saw the cages and the marks and the fear, and I walked away because no bounty is worth a soul. Jason stood in silence as Ara looked up and said in a voice so soft it almost vanished, I believe her. And that was enough for the next 2 days. Lena helped fortify the cabin, setting traps, building signal dampeners, sharing food packs from her ship, and on the third day Ara walked outside under her own strength, breathing the wild air and standing beneath the alien sky and death. Jason stood beside her, feeling the warmth of sunlight through broken clouds, and in that moment the silence between them was full, not of fear but of peace. But peace does not last when the past hunts with deep pockets and sharper blades, and on the fifth day the sky burned again as a true Khazari warship entered orbit, its scanners sweeping the valley, and Jason ran back to the ship, powering up the few systems left, and Lena readied her weapons, and Era stood in the doorway of the cabin, no longer weak, her eyes full of fire, and Jason turned to her and said, "We cannot outrun that," and Era nodded, then said, "We do not run this time, we make them fear." They worked as one, Jason feeding power from the freighter to old mining turrets, Era setting charges across the cliff paths, and Lena calling in an old favor from a rebel satellite above the planet. And when the drop pods came hissing through the air, the valley came alive with flame and sound. Jason fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. Era moved through the trees, a ghost and a storm. Lena covered them both with rifle fire, sharp and deadly, and for the first time the Khazari soldiers faltered, pulled back, regrouped, unsure of what they had walked into, and Jason shouted over the fire, "They are afraid," and Ara answered, "Because we gave them something to fear." The battle lasted until the sun rose again, and when it ended the warship was gone, the valley, scarred but standing, and Jason dropped to his knees in the mud, breathing hard and laughing through the pain, and Era knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his, and said, "In my language, this means we live." And Jason whispered back, "Then teach me your language, because I think I'm ready to learn free and forever." The message came through soft and clear like a whisper in the static. It was not hostile or angry, but calm, patient, and full of promise. Jason stared at the small screen in disbelief. The sender was someone he never expected, an old commander from the Khazari Syndicate, someone rumored lost in the chaos, who now wanted to talk, not fight. Ara sat beside him, her eyes watching every flicker of the screen as if reading secrets hidden beneath the words. Jason took a deep breath and pressed the reply button, a simple yes, and the line opened and a voice filled the room, low and steady, saying, "We have watched you both, your fight, your flight, and your bond. It is rare for the Syndicate to honor mercy, but your story has changed something, and there is a chance for peace, but only if you come and speak with us." Willingly, Yera looked at Jason, her eyes wide for the first time, full of questions, fear, and hope, and Jason nodded slowly. This was the moment they had been running from, and the moment they needed to face to be free once and for all. They prepared the freighter for the journey back, setting course for the Syndicate homeworld, a place full of shadows but also opportunity and change. The flight was long and quiet. Jason and Era talked about what they would say, how they would survive, and if peace was even possible after everything that had happened. And when they landed, the gates opened, not with guns or alarms but with silence and cautious eyes watching every step. As they passed through the halls toward a great chamber filled with leaders and watchers, and the air heavy with history and judgment, Jason spoke first, telling the story of fries, shared in a food court, of a bond born from kindness, of fear turned into loyalty, and of a fight not just for survival but for freedom. And Ara followed her voice, steady, sharing the pain of captivity and the cost of scars unseen. And when they finished, the room was silent. Then slowly the leaders began to speak and listen and debate, and finally a decision was made that would change their lives and many others. Forever the Syndicate would dismantle their hunting rings, begin to repair the damage, and offer asylum to those they had hunted, and a new council would be formed to watch over bonds like theirs, ensuring no more would suffer in silence. And Jason and Ara were named ambassadors of this new hope, tasked to travel and teach and protect the weak and lost. And as they stood side by side, they knew their journey had only just begun, but they were no longer alone. Years passed, and their story became legend, a tale told on stations and planets, a story of fries shared and bonds made of courage found in fear and love, born from unlikely places. And on a quiet hill far from war and shadow, Jason and Era sat watching stars flicker across the sky, sharing fries again. This time with laughter and peace, and the growls that once warned now were soft purrs of trust and belonging. Jason smiled and said, I never thought sharing my lunch would lead to this, and Ara replied in her soft voice, I never thought I would find a home in a stranger's kindness, and together they watched the night sky. Their bond stronger than ever, a promise that no matter what the universe threw at them, they would face it as one. The end.